The next young Sheldon returning character in First Marriage explains Mary's Big Bang Theory downfall. In the world of The Big Bang Theory, Mary Cooper, Sheldon's devoted yet often conflicted mother, is a character that has captivated audiences for over a decade. Her influence on Sheldon, though a point of pride and occasional friction, has been integral in shaping the man he becomes. However, fans of the show may have never fully understood the psychological intricacies of her character and the reasons behind her occasional downfall, especially regarding her strained relationships and the impact she had on her son's development. But now, with the unexpected return of a familiar character from young Sheldon, the first marriage that Mary experienced is coming under scrutiny in a way that could reshape our understanding of her trajectory. The character in question is none other than George Cooper Sr., Mary's first husband. Played by Lance Barber in Young Sheldon, George has long been a mystery to Big Bang Theory viewers, as his character was mentioned sparingly in the original show. George is depicted in Young Sheldon as a flawed, but generally well-meaning man. However, the nuances of his relationship with Mary and his role in her life have only begun to unravel. His eventual return to the Young Sheldon series, shedding light on his early years and the complexities of his marriage to Mary, offers a fresh perspective on her emotional downfall that was hinted at throughout The Big Bang Theory. The foundation of Mary and George's relationship. From the get-go, it's clear that Mary's relationship with George was complicated. Mary, an extremely religious woman, was initially in a very different place than George, who struggled with alcoholism and a tendency to take shortcuts in life. The differences between them were stark, and yet their union produced two children, Sheldon and Missy. George, who worked as a high school football coach, tried to provide for his family in a way that was consistent with his blue-collar upbringing, but his lack of emotional intelligence and his sometimes reckless behavior made him a difficult partner for Mary. While Mary loved George, her faith and dedication to a moral compass often clashed with his more laid-back, occasionally selfish nature. Their dynamic was built on a foundation of imbalance. George's inability to cope with Mary's high expectations and religious fervor often led to frustration and resentment. In the early days of their marriage, they might have believed that love would be enough to overcome these challenges, but over time, the cracks in their relationship began to show. The impact of George's infidelity. The turning point for Mary and George came when the latter was found to be unfaithful. Young Sheldon delves into the nuances of George's infidelity, which was a profound betrayal of Mary's trust and faith. She had always put her family above all else, and George's actions shattered her world in a way that few other events could. This moment of infidelity serves as the breaking point for their marriage, but it also acts as a precursor to the emotional struggles Mary would face in the future. As Mary found herself faced with the painful decision of whether to forgive George or leave him, her sense of self-worth and her deeply ingrained religious beliefs came into direct conflict. On one hand, Mary believed in the power of forgiveness. On the other, she couldn't shake the emotional trauma caused by George's betrayal. This conflict between her values and her reality began to take a toll on her emotional state, foreshadowing the unraveling of her marriage and her eventual sense of failure in the Big Bang Theory timeline. George's infidelity, and the emotional devastation it cost Mary, would serve as the foundation for much of her later actions. As she struggled with the aftermath of the affair, Mary's once unshakable faith began to waver, and her personal sense of failure, as both a wife and a mother, began to seep into her interactions with Sheldon and the other people in her life. The emotional fallout, impact on Mary's character. By the time The Big Bang Theory begins, Mary's emotional scars from her first marriage are evident, though rarely discussed outright. She often hides her insecurities behind the guise of stern authority, but deep down, Mary is a woman who has carried the burden of guilt and disappointment for years. Her strict upbringing of Sheldon, though well-intentioned, is shaped by her own emotional baggage. The perfectionism she instills in her son may be seen as an attempt to compensate for her own perceived failures, both as a wife and a mother. Her difficult marriage to George set a precedent for Mary's later romantic relationships, notably with her second husband, Alan, and her more fleeting flings. These subsequent relationships, though not as fraught as her first marriage, were also affected by the lingering effects of her unresolved emotional trauma. Mary's inability to fully open herself to love or forgiveness, as seen through her interactions with Sheldon's friends and family, only deepened her sense of isolation. The failure of Mary's marriage to George also helps explain why she was often at odds with Sheldon in The Big Bang Theory. While Sheldon's need for structure and control could be frustrating, Mary's perfectionism may have been her way of trying to impose some order on her life after so many years of uncertainty. Her difficulty in adapting to Sheldon's eccentricities and his refusal to adhere to conventional societal norms was a painful reminder of the ways in which she had failed to understand her own family dynamics. The return of George and the full picture. As young Sheldon continues to explore George's past, it's clear that the returning character will offer a much-needed perspective on Mary's downfall in The Big Bang Theory. George's return introduces the possibility of a different kind of redemption story for Mary, one that centers around the idea of healing from past wounds and making amends. However, the pain of George's betrayal might also serve as a reminder of the emotional scars that are often passed down to the next generation. If the character of George continues to develop in young Sheldon, it may eventually lead to an acknowledgement of the fact that Mary's struggles weren't solely her fault, but were shaped by the mistakes of her past. The eventual unraveling of Mary's character arc in The Big Bang Theory may no longer feel like a complete mystery, but instead a complex portrait of a woman caught between faith, love, and the consequences of past decisions. Through George's return, and the increased focus on his relationship with Mary, audiences are beginning to understand how Mary's emotional downfall was shaped by her first marriage and the personal struggles she never quite overcame. In the end, Mary's story, marked by love, betrayal, and the quest for redemption, may offer one of the most compelling narratives in the Big Bang Theory universe. With the return of George and the expansion of his character's backstory, viewers are granted a fuller understanding of how the emotional weight of Mary's past continues to impact the present, providing new layers to her character that will resonate long after the final season airs.